In the quiet corners of a bustling city, the shelter stood as a sanctuary for lost souls, both furry and human. Sarah Chen, the lead caretaker, had dedicated 15 years of her life to this place, witnessing countless tales of abandonment and rescue. Yet, one particular dog captured her heart in a way that felt almost magical. She named him Max, despite knowing that naming animals often made parting more painful. As she approached Max's kennel one morning, her heart sank. "Hey there, big guy," she greeted softly, her movements slow and deliberate. Max's ears perked up at the sound of her voice, but the flicker of hope in his eyes quickly faded. He let out a soft whine, his tail giving a weak thump against the cold concrete floor. It had been 3 long days since Max had arrived at the shelter, and in that time, he had barely touched his food or water. His cries echoed through the hallways, growing more distressed with each passing hour. "I wish you could tell me what's wrong," Sarah murmured, kneeling beside him. As her fingers brushed against his side, she frowned at the sight of his protruding ribs. "You need to eat, sweetie. We can't help you if you won't help yourself." Max let out another soft cry, this one filled with an even deeper pain. He turned his head toward Sarah, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw understanding in his eyes. Shaking her head, she chided herself for projecting human emotions onto him. It was clear Max was suffering, but what he truly needed was professional help. "All right, Max," Sarah said, determination settling in her voice. "It's time we got you checked out properly." The local veterinary clinic was small, but well-equipped, run by Dr. James Thoron, a man whose compassion for animals was rivaled only by his surgical skill. Sarah had known him for years, and if anyone could uncover the mystery behind Max's condition, it was him. As she entered the clinic with Max securely on a leash, Dr. Thoron greeted her warmly. "What brings you in today?" His gaze fell on Max, and his expression softened. "This is Max," Sarah explained, giving the dog a reassuring pat. "He was brought to the shelter 3 days ago. The owners said they couldn't keep him anymore." Her voice trailed off, worry clouding her brow. Dr. Thoron nodded, sensing the unspoken concerns in her words. "You think there's more to the story?" he asked gently. "He won't stop crying," Sarah admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "He barely eats or drinks. I know it's normal for dogs to be distressed when they're first brought in, but this feels different." As Dr. Thoron knelt beside Max, speaking softly, the examination began. "Hey there, big guy. Let's see what's going on with you, shall we?" Max whimpered, but allowed the vet to check him over. "He's definitely underweight," Dr. Thoron murmured, his brow furrowing. "Coat's in bad shape too. Could be neglect, or it might indicate underlying health issues." As the examination continued, the vet's frown deepened. When he palpated Max's abdomen, the dog let out a sharp yelp of pain, causing Sarah to flinch. "I don't like the feel of his abdomen," Dr. Thoron said, concern tightening his voice. "It's distended and seems tender. I'd like to do some x-rays and blood work." "Of course," Sarah replied, her worry escalating. The next hour was a whirlwind of activity. Surprisingly cooperative, Max allowed the clinic staff to take blood samples and prepare him for x-rays. It was as if he understood they were trying to help him, his cries quieting to soft whimpers. When the results came back, the atmosphere in the examination room shifted. Dr. Thoron's face turned grave as he beckoned Sarah over to the lightbox. "Sarah," he said, his tone low and serious, "I need you to call 911 right now." Sarah's heart raced. "What? Why? What's wrong with him?" Dr. Thoron pointed to several small, irregularly shaped objects visible in Max's abdominal cavity. "These are bullets, Sarah. At least 3 of them. This dog has been shot." The world tilted as Sarah processed this shocking revelation. "Shot?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "But how? Why?" "I don't know," Dr. Thoron replied grimly. "But this is now a case of animal abuse. We need to report it to the authorities immediately, and Max needs emergency surgery. Those bullets need to come out now." As if on cue, Max let out another cry, this one weaker than before. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she covered her mouth with trembling hands. How could anyone do this to such a gentle creature? With shaking fingers, she dialed 911, her mind racing. Who had done this to Max? Was it the same person who had abandoned him at the shelter? How long had he been suffering like this? The hours that followed blurred into a haze of police officers taking statements, photographs, and Dr. Thorin's team prepping Max for emergency surgery. Through it all, Sarah stayed by Max's side, whispering words of comfort. "You're going to be okay," she murmured, stroking his head gently as the anesthesia took effect. "We're going to take care of you. You're safe now." As Max was wheeled into surgery, Sarah found herself in the waiting room, her mind replaying every moment since his arrival. Had there been signs she missed? Could she have figured this out sooner? Officer Elena Rodriguez, a kind woman with sharp eyes, sat beside Sarah. "Miss Chen," she said gently, "I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions about the dog." "Of course. What do you need to know?" "Can you tell me about the day Max was brought in? Who brought him? Did they give any explanation?" Sarah closed her eyes, recalling the day. "It was a man," she said slowly. "Middle-aged, I'd say. He said Max belonged to his elderly father, who had recently passed away. He claimed he couldn't keep the dog because of allergies." Officer Rodriguez nodded, making notes. "Did anything about his story seem off to you?" Sarah frowned, thinking hard. "He seemed nervous. At the time, I thought it was just stress from giving up a family pet, but..." Her voice trailed off, a horrible thought creeping in. "What is it?" Officer Rodriguez prompted gently. "He was wearing long sleeves," Sarah recalled suddenly. "It was a hot day, but he had on a long-sleeve shirt. When he reached out to hand me Max's leash, I saw scratches on his wrist." Officer Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. "As if the dog had defended himself," she murmured. "Oh, God," Sarah whispered, feeling sick. "Do you think he was the one who shot Max?" "We can't jump to conclusions," Officer Rodriguez replied, her voice gentle but firm. "But it's certainly a possibility. We'll be investigating. Do you remember anything else about this man? Any distinguishing features? The car he drove?" Sarah racked her brain, trying to recall every detail. "He had a scar on his left cheek," she said suddenly. "And I think his car was a blue sedan, an older model." As Sarah continued to provide details, her mind drifted back to Max. The surgery had been going on for hours now. Was that a good sign or a bad one? Just as she felt she might go mad from the waiting, Dr. Thorin emerged from the surgical suite, his scrubs spattered with blood. He looked exhausted, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "He made it through the surgery," Dr. Thorin announced, and Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. "We removed 3 bullets and repaired the damage they caused. It was touch and go for a while. He lost a lot of blood, but he's a fighter." "Can I see him?" Sarah asked, her voice choked with emotion. Dr. Thorin nodded. "He's in recovery now. You can see him, but only for a few minutes. He needs rest." As Sarah followed Dr. Thorin to the recovery area, Officer Rodriguez touched her arm gently. "We'll need to take an official statement from you later," she said, "and we'll keep you updated on the investigation." "Thank you for your help, Chen. You may have saved this dog's life in more ways than one." Max lay on a padded table, hooked up to various monitors and IV drips. His body had been shaved in several places, revealing angry red incisions, held closed with neat rows of stitches. But as Sarah approached, his tail gave a weak thump, and he lifted his head slightly. "Hey, sweet boy," Sarah murmured gently, stroking the unshaved part of his head. "You did so well, you're so brave." Max whined softly, nuzzling into her hand. For the first time since his arrival at the shelter, his eyes seemed clear, pain and fear replaced by a tentative trust. I don't know what happened to you, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. But I promise you, it's over now. You're safe, and we're going to find you the best home with people who will love you and protect you the way you deserve. As Sarah continued to provide details, her mind drifted back to Max. The surgery had been going on for hours now. Was that a good sign or a bad one? Just as she felt she might go mad from the waiting, Dr. Theron emerged from the surgical suite, his scrubs spattered with blood. He looked exhausted, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He made it through the surgery, Dr. Theron announced, and Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. We removed 3 bullets and repaired the damage they caused. It was touch and go for a while. He lost a lot of blood, but he's a fighter. Can I see him? Sarah asked, her voice choked with emotion. Dr. Thorin nodded. He's in recovery now. You can see him, but only for a few minutes. He needs rest. As Sarah followed Dr. Thorin to the recovery area, Officer Rodriguez touched her arm gently. We'll need to take an official statement from you later, she said, and we'll keep you updated on the investigation. Thank you for your help, Chen. You may have saved this dog's life in more ways than one. Max lay on a padded table, hooked up to various monitors and IV drips. His body had been shaved in several places, revealing angry red incisions held closed with neat rows of stitches. But as Sarah approached, his tail gave a weak thump, and he lifted his head slightly. Hey, sweet boy, Sarah murmured gently, stroking the unshaved part of his head. You did so well. You're so brave. Max whined softly, nuzzling into her hand. For the first time since his arrival at the shelter, his eyes seemed clear, pain and fear replaced by a tentative trust. I don't know what happened to you, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. But I promise you, it's over now. You're safe, and we're going to find you the best home with people who will love you and protect you the way you deserve. As the days passed, Max's recovery amazed everyone at the clinic. His wounds healed cleanly, and with proper nutrition and care, he began to regain weight. His coat, regularly brushed and treated, started to regain its lustrous sheen, but the most remarkable change was in his demeanor. The mournful cries that had once echoed through the shelter were replaced by excited barks whenever Sarah came to visit. His tail, once tucked fearfully between his legs, now wagged with joyful abandon. Meanwhile, the police investigation progressed, aided by Sarah's description and the evidence collected from Max's surgically removed bullets. 2 weeks after Max's surgery, Officer Rodriguez arrived at the shelter with news. We've made an arrest, she informed Sarah. The man who brought Max in, his name is Robert Carlson. Turns out Max wasn't his father's dog at all. Carlson had stolen Max from his neighbor's yard, intending to sell him. But when Max fought back, Carlson panicked and shot him. A complex mix of emotions washed over Sarah. Relief that the perpetrator had been caught, anger at the cruelty Max had endured, and deep sadness for all the suffering the dog had experienced. What will happen to him? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. He's facing charges of animal cruelty, theft, and illegal discharge of a firearm, Officer Rodriguez replied. Given the evidence, it's likely he'll be convicted. As news of Max's ordeal spread, the community rallied around him. Donations poured into the shelter to cover his medical expenses. Local news stations ran features on his recovery, and perhaps most heartening of all, adoption offers began to flood in. But for Sarah, letting Max go was proving harder than she'd anticipated. Over the weeks of his recovery, she had grown deeply attached to the resilient German Shepherd. The thought of saying goodbye made her heart ache. During one of Max's checkups, Dr. Thorin broached the subject. Sarah, he said gently, watching her play with Max in the clinic's small yard. Have you considered adopting him yourself? Surprised, Sarah looked up. I didn't think I could, she admitted. There are policies about staff adopting animals from the shelter. Dr. Thorin smiled. I've spoken with the shelter board. Given the unique circumstances, They're willing to make an exception, if you want to, that is. Looking at Max, who was gazing back at her with soulful eyes and a wagging tail, Sarah felt a wave of certainty wash over her. In that moment, she knew there was only one choice she could make. 2 months after being abandoned at the shelter, Max, now officially named Maxwell Chen, went home with Sarah. His homecoming was a celebration, with friends, shelter staff, and even Officer Rodriguez stopping by to wish them well. As night fell and the last guest departed, Sarah sat on her couch, Max's head resting contentedly in her lap. She stroked his ears, marveling at how far they'd come. "You know," she said softly, "when you first came to us, I never imagined this is where we'd end up. But I'm so glad we did." Max looked up at her, his eyes full of love and trust. He gave a soft woof, as if in agreement, then snuggled closer. Feeling a sense of peace settle over her, Sarah realized that Max's journey had been one of unimaginable cruelty, but it had led him to a place of love and safety. In saving him, she had found a piece of herself she didn't know was missing. As she drifted off to sleep, Max a warm, comforting presence beside her, Sarah thought about the long road ahead. There would be challenges, certainly. Max still had healing to do, both physically and emotionally. But they would face those challenges together. For Max was more than just a pet now. He was a survivor, a symbol of resilience, and a testament to the healing power of compassion. And for Sarah, he was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found, sometimes in the most unexpected places. The once abandoned dog who had cried so mournfully in his kennel now slept peacefully, safe in the knowledge that he was home. Watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest, Sarah knew that in giving Max a second chance at life, she had been given one too. Their story, born from tragedy, was blossoming into something beautiful. And whatever the future held, they would face it together, with courage, compassion, and an unshakable bond forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by love.